Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you once again for the outstanding timekeeping thus far. Continuing with our theme of joint space to enable maximal tri-service impact support and really pushing forward in the national and international interest. Delighted to welcome our keynote speaker to launch this final session for today. General Sir Charlie Stickland, Chief of Joint Operations at Permanent Joint Headquarters. General Stickland joined the Royal Marines in 1987, has seen service in the High North, the Far East, Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan. He's the UK Chief Joint Operations responsible for commanding and integrating all UK global operations, and notably it is his team that lead the UK's overall support to Ukraine. We are genuinely honoured and privileged to have General Stickland with us today. General Stickland, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The worst thing is when somebody announces when you join the military. It makes you feel incredibly old. But pleasingly, there are some other old people in the audience that know me and have served with me over the years. So it's good to see people. My title I've been given is How Will the UK Tackle Threats in the Space Domain? These threats threaten not only national security, but our operations. Multi-domain operations are becoming increasingly important. And how will space integrate with land, sea, air, cyber domains in tackling these threats? Crumbs, I thought it was a bit heavy, if I'm honest. So I also thought it was quite depressing because it was about threats. And, you know, without DPS, we're back into the Stone Age. So I'm going to try and give a little bit of balance. I'm going to talk about threats and opportunities. And I have to be honest, my delivery is going to be slightly complicated and I hope not lessened. But as I was sitting at my computer last night fettling these words, there are all sorts of folk from the Levant and headquarters various ringing up, wanting decisions and wanting clarity over what is happening in the Middle East. But it was not lost on me that much of the information that my team briefed me on, much of the information that we make decisions upon, is derived on space-based capability. First of all, a thank you. A thank you to UK Space Command and the Aerospace Power Association for organising this conference and giving me the opportunity to be a part of it. I am delighted to be here because it's a great opportunity to foster a discussion with a diverse group of people, industry, defence, and importantly, our international partners. So I am going to completely ignore my title, and forgive me to those who gave it, but I'm going to talk about joint space. I'm going to spend a little time discussing threats. I'm going to talk about the space domain itself, and then I'm going to look at how that affects joint operations, and then I'm going to talk about how actually we're integrating space into that which we do now. And so integration is at the core of the short pitch I'm going to give. I think that integration is crucial to collaboration in terms of jointery, but also in terms of global defence. I'm going to talk threats, opportunity, reality, and lexicon. And I think lexicon is really, really important when it comes to cultural change. And with the space-based capability, we are dealing with a cultural change, in my view, in my world. The reality is that space is integral to all that we do and all that we're going to do going forward. Hence, it has to be intimately woven into the joint fight. Full stop. The lexicon point, I think, is interesting. So the space component, I believe it's a thing. It can do stuff. It can and must be integrated. It can be supported or it can be supporting. It gets, and hopefully, Tedders, obeys orders. But it also helps with operational design. It helps with plans. And then it can be the core element of joint effect. The other thing in terms of lexicon that I think is important is the idea or definition or concept of space as a domain, or the astrographic domain. That bit we've all talked about before that sits above the land, the sea, and the air environments. But I think the cultural change of that lexicon is really, really important, particularly the space component. And some will disagree with me. Is it a componency? I don't really care. What I'm trying to do by using a componency model is make sure that those folk in the joint space recognize that it has to be brought in and that it's part of the tapestry of that which we must use in future and current operations. And I think that contribution is brilliant because in the astrographic domain, you've got that thing, and you all know this. So some of the things I'm going to say to this august audience, I'll be really honest, is you already know. But I hope what I'm going to give you as I just whistle through some topics and then take some questions is that you can see from how I'm talking about it, I genuinely believe that it's part of the jigsaw and must be. So in terms of that enabling thing, you all know that space provides me communications, ISR, EW, P&T, knowledge of adversaries, and frankly, that's why we're in space at the moment. It's a thing. But I think there's some really interesting things from the potential fight in the astrographic domain itself, not only to keep our space capabilities alive, but I like to think about how it might cause a dilemma, strategic dilemmas to our adversaries, and actually therefore deliver us competitive advantage. We have to also see it through that lens as we progress in the development of this aspect. And so increasingly, that's referred to as space control and the Space Command mission of protect and defend. But I quite like the ideas of degrade, a non-traditional mission verb of neuter or cause doubt. And I think that's a really important thing of how we think about just modern capability. We can't just be defending. How are we causing dilemmas and changing our adversaries' decision-making calculus? So that's the issue of reality, that's the issue of lexicon, and that's the issue of opportunity. But it is worth touching just briefly on threats, because you all know, again, the threats in the space domain are hugely varied, and they are hugely challenging, given that we are thinking hundreds, thousands of miles above all the other business, and therefore it is a unique problem set. The capabilities our adversaries have grown significantly. They have invested in them. And our own national space strategy has acknowledged that we have not yet kept pace with them and that there is much to do. And that this contested environment, as you might transition to conflict, becomes all the more complicated and difficult. But therefore, there needs to be a collective drive, I think, amongst the international community to keep pace with our allies, but also in targeted, specific clinical areas to try and outpace our adversaries. So these threats, you all know, again, cover a spectrum from short-term denial to complete destruction. They range from jamming and non-kinetic effects through to counter-space capabilities with direct-ascent anti-satellite weapons and co-orbit kill vehicles. And then you've got the worrying thing about the nuclear question and potentially the contravention of the Outer Space Treaty that we've had since 1967. All of that means UK and all other countries must ensure we have greater resilience in our space infrastructure, because our modern way of life is connected to space. Financial costs of space not operating are huge, and therefore it firmly is a national security issue. And we, again, the government, UK government, is rightly aware of that because of the national space strategy and how it sets out how we think about this problem. But it's also true of defence and military operations. Challenges and threats in the space domain not only affect, as obviously, the autographic domain, but also land, sea, air, space, and cyber, because I consistently think in 5 domains. But we also know space is a critical enabler for us. Things you know, weapon guidance, maritime navigation, albeit my good friend, the first Sea Lord, Sir Ben Key, is a wizard with a sextant, so that might be all right. ISR, understanding, links to remotely piloted systems, both subsurface, surface, and in the air, and a vast amount of information and communications. They are a key driver for decision-making. They are a key driver for decision advantage. And I think that's another piece of the jigsaw we need to think about. So reality, lexicon, threats, opportunities. Where does that take us? First of all, I think it's worth recognizing some fascinating lessons from that which we are doing with our partners in Ukraine. I'm not one of these people that believes that everything that happens in Ukraine is a panacea, warfare's changed irrevocably. I just think it shows some really powerful and important lessons that we must layer onto other operations and map across the findings that we are taking from that extraordinary and most vexed of conflicts. 1 hour before the invasion started, there was a cyber attack on the Viasat satellite network. The National Cybersecurity Centre assessed that Russia was most certainly, probably, responsible. Destructive malware disabled tens of thousands of user terminals for the Viasat system and a US-based commercial network. This required factory repair, so it had a massive consequence all the way across other users, therefore seen as an indiscriminate act. But its consequences to the Ukrainian armed forces in that first hour were really, really significant. But what's extremely impressive is how our Ukrainian friends, despite their limited sovereign capability in the space resource terms, have been able to deal with such threat and offsetting a lack of protection and also capability, have bought in data, bought in services from the commercial market to enable their military operations. Again, you all know the example of Starlink, so I don't need to overplay it. But that SATCOM system, from a civilian and military perspective, is estimated to have 42,000 terminals in the country and is a major, major part of their architecture for the conduct of modern operations. But they constantly and consistently understand that that is not assured, and that is a risk that they take and they manage as they move through. Again, beyond Starlink, you again all know that many people in my sector are heavily reliant on Earth observation data and services providing electro-optical imagery from a variety of military users. It's a thing. It's the thing we use. And therefore, it's amazing. It genuinely, genuinely helps you with your decision calculus and how you're going to do your business. But there are key challenges that exist as we go. One of those challenges, obviously, is how do we protect commercial assets? How does defence and industry collaborate to provide suitable protection, to defend or to risk mitigate? I think that's something that government, defence and industry are going to have to consider as we play on this journey together. And second, for me, is the problem of attribution, and then a response if there is attribution. So far, I've spoken a lot about threats. I want to move across to opportunities, but I think it's important for me as we go through, the conversation I have with Space Command is we're getting after some of those threats now. Some of those conversations with US Space Command, we're getting after those threats now because we see them and we're working through that as we go through. But I wasn't invited here to give you a set of how problems play out. The idea was essentially to talk from a Joint Commander's perspective about how we integrate space. As you heard from the introduction, my mission is to command and integrate global operations across 5 domains in support of national security objectives. And space for me is an opportunity because it's an enabler and it's an actor. And indeed, UK Space Command is an inherently joint organisation. And I credit them with a phenomenal success since it was established in 2021 and have been hugely impressed by the forward-leaning nature of the team to say how they integrate and play with us. Sovereign capabilities are starting to play out from our perspective with program Istari and the launch of the Taiki resource, which is an ISR satellite just recently launched as first part of the MOD program. I think this is really, really important because there's something about the fact that we will have a sovereign and military-owned capability that will inevitably support joint and special operations. And in my role as defence lead for multi-domain integration at the operational level, if I take Ukraine, if I take counter-Russia, if I take advanced conventional weapons movement in the Middle East, the PGHQ group is not only delivering and integrating joint operations, we're now thinking more broadly. We essentially now integrate combined, i.e. coalition, joint, special, and in the special bucket, I've got cyber, space, special capabilities, special forces, and special operations forces, also discrete and covert activity, which means agencies. Before the Ukraine thing played out, most of the focus I had was just in the joint space. But combined joint, special, discrete, and covert means the alchemy that you can create is both impactful but complicated and different. Space, interestingly, supports that spectrum of activity and acts as a clear force multiplier in many of the areas. There's a frustration I have, which is classification, because classification means that I can't sit and tell this august audience some of the things that we've done. But in modern operations in the past couple of years, we absolutely have integrated space, cyber, ground, air in a way that we have never done before. And that's hugely fascinating, stimulating, and we haven't necessarily always got it right. But we are on a journey of exploring, understanding, and optimizing. And crucially, the endeavour is all about literacy. And so we've got some bits of the jigsaw which I think are really powerful. The Space Academy at Shrivenham isn't just for people that do things in space. They're for people in my staff to understand space. The fact that we deal on a daily basis with the Space Operations Centre and the 2 squadrons we've set means that my staff and my team are starting to have this imbued within them as they start to think about operational design and how we take things forward. And also, again, Space Command have been brilliant at setting a set of liaison officers all around the bazaars, again, to give us that knowledge. So there are challenges as we take this forward. The first one is people must learn and understand, because I don't think people understand the opportunity, because they don't understand. The second challenge, I think, is that of transparency. There are multiple compartments in this space. There are multiple things that you need to know or don't need to know. And again, talking to General Whiting from US Space Command, who's in the audience, one of the things we were talking about yesterday was something that the US Undersecretary has set out, which is actually trying to get a more broad conversation about space with allies and partners. These things take time, but these things are essential. But for me, this is also broader than just a UK-US relationship. My 2-star deployable headquarters, the Standing Joint Headquarters, are driving forward integration of this nature with both the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, the beer-drinking nations of the North, our French mates in the CJEF, and also stepping into NATO. And NATO recognising space as an operational domain, I think, is also really, really important. Space is becoming a consistent and persistent conversation. So what am I up to before I close? Very quickly, I'm looking to integrate joint, combined, special, discrete and covert activity. I want to think effect and outcome and integration and worry less about ownership. I want to operate bilaterally, trilaterally, minilaterally and multilaterally, because those clubs within clubs allow us to overcome some of the security boundaries that we have, but it means you can create a collective around an outcome. I want to leverage the all-important triumvirate of space, special forces and cyber. I want to capitalise on the capabilities of space, but I also want to use the joint and special force to assist with counter-space activity, bearing in mind that space is controlled on the land, and there is a threat vector that we must explore as we go forward. So there we go. Threats, opportunities. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the space enterprise. And thank you to you in the space enterprise for developing capability, leveraging technology, reaching out to allies and partners, and certainly trying to help me outpace adversaries. All I know is out of chaos comes opportunity. And as I read my daily news feed, I think we all are clear we recognise the threats and uncertainty in which we face. I think, again, in this audience, we must turn those uncertainties to opportunities, and we must get to rapidly iterating outcomes with integration at its core and space being a component and constituent part throughout of the joint endeavour. That's me. I don't know if we've got any time for questions, but thank you for listening to my inane rambles. And I think this is the most fascinating thing, is this whole enterprise has taught an old dog quite a lot of new tricks. And there's an awful lot to explore. So if we've got time, I'm very happy to take questions, and then they will shovel me off when required. Thank you very much.
General Stickland, you have gone absolutely bang on time. I want to keep the momentum going because I think that you have set your strategic perspective. You've outlined the forcing functions for what operational capabilities must actually meet. And I think that leads very nicely on to the next panel. So once again, thank you very much for your time, sir. I hope you can stay with us for the remainder of the afternoon. Thank you again.
Pleasure.